Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere warm, fragrant, and humming with life. A place where the ocean smells like molasses and citrus, and where roosters begin their daily gossip long before the sun feels ready. You're waking up in early 19th century Kingston, Jamaica, in the same sleepy dawn that greets a little girl named Mary Grant, who, spoiler alert, will later become Mary Seacole, one of the bravest nurses in Victorian history. You probably won't survive the mosquitoes though, so let's keep this journey hypothetical. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now from somewhere across the world, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun to see this little night shift community forming. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the rhythm. Kingston isn't quiet. It never pretends to be. Even before the light slides through the wooden shutters, you hear the city stretch awake. A mule braying, someone chopping breadfruit, vendors singing about their papayas as if advertising salvation itself. Inside a modest but lively house near East Street, a girl with alert brown eyes blinks herself into another morning. That's Mary. Her mother, Mrs. Grant, moves like purpose in motion, part innkeeper, part healer, part household general. She's already grinding herbs in a mortar, the rhythmic thump echoing through the room like a heartbeat. The smell is sharp and earthy, camphor, lime leaf, maybe a hint of allspice. You watch as she scoops a paste into a clay jar, muttering something about fever and stubborn spirits. This, you realize, is Mary's first classroom. No chalkboard, just pestles and poultices. In this mixed heritage home, half African traditions, half British practicality, medicine isn't a profession, it's survival. A British officer's wife appears at the door, pale as linen, clutching her stomach. "Mrs. Grant, the heat again," she says, nearly swooning. Mrs. Grant doesn't flinch. "Sit, drink," she commands, handing her a cup of what smells like peppery molasses tea. Mary watches, wide-eyed, absorbing everything. The steady hands, the calm tone, the invisible line between commerce and compassion. That's the strange beauty of her childhood. The world comes to her doorstep, sailors smelling of tar and rum, widows seeking herbal blessings, clerks escaping the fever wards. Everyone leaves lighter, at least in spirit, and Mrs. Grant's ledger fills up alongside her reputation. Mary's father, a Scottish soldier, isn't around much, posted elsewhere, another ghost in red uniform, but his presence lingers in the stories. Her mother calls him that stubborn Highlander. He gave Mary her fair skin and quick wit, the kind that cuts through both weather and prejudice. Still, Jamaica defines her more than anything. The warmth, the contradictions, the constant negotiation between worlds. Outside, sunlight floods the yard. A rooster struts past like he owns the place. Mary steps onto the veranda, her bare feet meeting the cool tiles. She watches her neighbors hauling water, hears a distant church bell arguing with a drum beat. This island is a mosaic. Enslaved Africans, newly freed yet still struggling for footing, European settlers clinging to their ways, and a growing class of free Creoles like the Grants, navigating the delicate middle. A mainstream historical fact slides in here. Jamaica, by Mary's birth in 1805, was still a British colony heavily dependent on sugar plantations. Slavery wouldn't be fully abolished until 1838, meaning she grew up in a time when freedom and injustice coexisted awkwardly, often under the same roof. Mrs. Grant's boarding house, known later as Blundell Hall, became famous for hosting soldiers, merchants, and those recovering from tropical illness. It was both a business and a refuge, or a place where a convalescent could sip broth one moment and overhear gossip about London politics the next. Little Mary carries trays, listens, learns. "You have to read people before you read books," her mother says, tapping her temple. That advice stays with her longer than any formal education. Here's your quirky tidbit for the night. Some of Mrs. Grant's remedies included things that would make modern pharmacists weep, like roasted plantain peel mixed with rum for burns, or ground lizard tail in vinegar for fevers. And somehow half of it worked. The line between science and superstition was blurrier than a tropical mirage. As Mary grows, she starts experimenting too. You catch her sneaking into the kitchen, pretending to heal the family's parrot from a fake cough. It squawks in protest, but she insists, patient, non-compliant, in perfect imitation of her mother's scolding tone. By late afternoon, the house is a swirl of activity. The scent of goat stew, candle wax, and sea salt mix into something oddly comforting. A ship has docked, and guests are expected. Mrs. Grant inspects the linens, while Mary helps polish the brass lamp until it gleams like bottled sunlight. Night drifts in slow blue layers. Lanterns flicker, and conversation hums over plates of yam and salted fish. Mary sits near the doorway, half listening, half dreaming. She's fascinated by stories of far-off places. Cuba, Panama, London. Names that sound like doorways to different versions of herself. And this is where historians still argue. Was young Mary's later restlessness a reaction to colonial restriction or a natural extension of her mother's ambition? Either way, she inherited a double legacy: the healer's steady hand and the merchant's keen eye for opportunity. Outside, the waves murmur against the harbor wall. Inside, Mary's eyelids droop as the chatter fades into lullaby rhythm. Somewhere, her mother hums an old Ashanti tune, one that survived centuries and shipwrecks to find a home here. You glance again at the little girl curled under her linen sheet. She doesn't know it yet, but those hands that fetched herbs and clean jars will one day hold the fevered wrists of soldiers in the Crimean mud. The path between Kingston and war hospitals seems impossible, but in her world, nothing truly ends. It just transforms. The rooster crows again, prematurely confident. Mrs. Grant sighs from the other room. That fool bird always thinks he brings the sun. You smile in the dark. Maybe he does. You lean back into the quiet, the kind that hums rather than sleeps. You can almost smell the warm night air and hear the distant surf. For now, the world of ledgers and battlefields is still far away. All that exists is this house, this heartbeat, this island slowly spinning toward dawn. Morning again, already too bright, already humming. The shutters creak open and sunlight pours in like spilled syrup across the wooden floorboards. You stretch beside little Mary Grant, who's squinting at the day as though she plans to wrestle it into shape. The house smells of camphor and coffee, two scents that could wake even the laziest saint. Down in the yard, Mrs. Grant is already at work, and you follow Mary out into the morning heat that has the audacity to feel like noon. The herb garden shimmers with dew, lemongrass, cerasee, aloe, and a strange vine whose flowers smell like sugar and soap. Her mother's hands move deftly, snipping, sorting, murmuring the uses of each. This one for belly pains, this one for morning hearts, she says. Mary listens, wide-eyed, a little apprentice in bare feet and cotton frock. You crouch beside her and realize This is education, island style. No tidy rows of desks, just soil, scent, and sunlight. Each leaf holds a story. When the first patient arrives, a dock worker pale with fever, Mary hurries to fetch water. She watches as her mother mixes a concoction of crushed mint, cinnamon bark, and limes. It looks more like salad dressing than medicine, but the man drinks, grimaces, and soon falls asleep under the shade. Sweat is the cure, Mrs. Grant explains. The body just forgets how. A mainstream historical fact drifts in with the breeze. Jamaican doctresses, as they were called, formed an entire healing tradition long before licensed medicine reached the Caribbean in any formal way. They combined African herbal knowledge, indigenous remedies, and bits of British science into something entirely their own. Some colonial doctors mocked them, others quietly took notes. Mary's curiosity doesn't stop at leaves and potions. She wants to understand why. Why does pepper cure chills, Mama? Why not sugar? Mrs. Grant raises an eyebrow. Because sugar spoils the truth. That answer, both mystical and practical, sums up half the island's philosophy. By noon, the house is an orchestra of activity. Patients come and go. Soup simmers. A boy strums a banjo in the alley. Mary helps prepare poultices, herbs boiled, mashed, and wrapped in clean cloth. The smell of boiled linen and vinegar hangs in the air, sharp but oddly comforting. Here's your quirky tidbit for the hour. Early Caribbean medicine often used ingredients that sound straight out of a witch's pantry. Powdered coral, crushed insects, even dried spider web for wounds. You can almost hear modern doctors sighing. But sometimes these oddities worked better than the imported tonics sold in London pharmacies. Nature, it turns out, had a longer resume. After lunch, the boarding house fills again. British sailors drop by, hats in hand, looking more sunburned than healthy. They complain of the flux, which, let's just say, isn't something you want to discuss over a meal. Mrs. Grant gives them ginger tea and calm instructions. Mary helps by handing out clean rags, then sneaks glances at the ledger, fascinated by the mix of names and currencies. Pounds, pesos, shillings, shells. Each patient pays differently, yet somehow her mother always finds balance. You realize Mary's learning more than medicine. She's learning business, strategy, human psychology. Each cured sailor is also a satisfied customer. Each polite farewell, another line in an invisible book of reputation. Historians still argue whether Mrs. Grant truly ran one of Kingston's most respected boarding houses or whether later stories embellished her success, but the evidence suggests this was more than folklore. Letters from travelers mention a Mrs. Grant, the most capable lady in Kingston, and the steady stream of guests proves her fame was real enough to echo. In the evenings, when the day's noise finally softens, Mary curls on the veranda with a tattered British medical guide her mother found in a market stall. She can't pronounce half the words, chloroform, quinine, dyspepsia, but she studies them as if decoding magic. When a term eludes her, she scribbles her own definitions in the margins. Phlegm, something no one wants. Not wrong, really. Sometimes, local women visit for gossip more than cures. They bring baskets of fruit and stories of husbands behaving badly. A little tamarind in his stew might fix that, one jokes. Mary giggles, pretending to take notes. By the time dusk falls, her small hands smell perpetually of herbs and lime peel. She watches moths flutter around the oil lamps, their wings glinting like parchment. Everything in her world glows faintly. Life, decay, renewal, all cycling together. And though she's still a child, You can feel something forming inside her, the quiet certainty that she belongs to two worlds and must learn to walk both. The proper British manners drilled into her by visiting teachers sit uneasily beside the rhythmic chants her mother hums when treating patients. She absorbs both without complaint, like a sponge dipped in two oceans. One humid night, a patient doesn't make it. The house grows still, the laughter gone. Mary finds her mother cleaning the empty cot, eyes steady but tired. "We do what we can," Mrs. Grant murmurs, "and the rest belongs to heaven." Mary nods, trying to swallow that truth. She's seen life return under her mother's hands too many times to fear death completely, but this time, it lingers. She sneaks out into the courtyard, watching the stars. They pulse faintly, reflected in a bowl of water left to cool under the moon. The same stars her Scottish father once mentioned when promising letters that rarely came. She whispers to them anyway, asking to see more of the world someday, somewhere bigger than Kingston, maybe colder, maybe lonelier, but hers to explore. You can feel the restlessness blooming, that seed of curiosity stretching toward the horizon. And while you know what's coming, the travel, the tragedy, the triumph, it's hard not to want her to stay here just a little longer, barefoot among lemongrass and laughter, in a world that feels simple because she doesn't yet know how complicated compassion can be. A final gust of wind rustles through the leaves, bringing the smell of rain. Mrs. Grant calls her back inside before the storm breaks. You follow, feeling the first cool drops hit the ground. The shutters close, the lamps dim, and mother and daughter huddle near the window, watching lightning illuminate the harbor. "Tomorrow," Mrs. Grant says softly, "we'll make cough syrup from guava bark." Mary smiles drowsily. "And ginger?" she asks. "Always ginger." You lean back, lulled by thunder's slow percussion and the scent of the herbs drying on the rafters. Sleep comes easy in this house, even when the world outside never stops buzzing. The air hangs heavy that summer, even by Jamaican standards. You can feel it clinging to your skin before dawn, that thick, syrupy heat that makes the dogs too lazy to bark and the children too tired to run. The crows have stopped complaining, and that's how you know something's wrong. Mary Grant, older now, her limbs lanky and her hair tied back in a rush bun, leans against the doorway, squinting toward the street. Somewhere beyond the market square, a bell tolls 3 slow times, not for church, for sickness. Word travels faster than the breeze. Cholera has come again. You follow her as she rushes after her mother, who's already halfway down the road with a basket of clean rags and a jar of camphor oil. The smell of vinegar and panic fills the air. People slam shutters. Shopkeepers toss herbs into boiling pots as though steam itself could keep death out. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Cholera hit Jamaica multiple times in the 19th century, carried by ships and worsened by crowded, unsanitary towns. It killed thousands, rich and poor alike, because no one yet understood that invisible microbes, not bad air, caused it. Mary doesn't have the luxury of fear. You move beside her as she kneels beside the first patient, a woman crumpled on the ground outside a tailor's shop, skin gray, eyes rolled upward. Mary's hands tremble for only a second before she remembers what to do. Water first, slowly, with a pinch of salt. Her mother always said, "Keep them alive between the breaths." She whispers reassurance, dabbing the woman's forehead with a cloth soaked in mint water. You help her lift the patient's head, but the body feels too light, too far gone. A cart rattles past, piled with others. Mary doesn't cry. She just presses her palms together and whispers, "Next one." By noon, Kingston looks like it's holding its breath. The harbor, usually noisy with laughter and sailor shanties, lies still. Even the rum shops have gone quiet. The air reeks of disinfectant, vinegar, lime, and fear. Mary works until her skin shines with sweat and fatigue. She boils linen in giant copper pots, burns old bedding, mixes broth for survivors who can still swallow. Her mother moves like a storm, unstoppable. Together, they turn their boarding house into a small hospital. You see the guests, men once loud and careless, helping now, carrying buckets, fetching water, keeping fires alive. Fear can humble anyone. At night, when the cries lessen, Mary sits on the veranda, her apron stiff with dried salt and her hands red from scrubbing. A candle flickers beside her as she writes in a small notebook, trying to keep track of what helps and what doesn't. Camphor burns too sharp, mint steadies, warm rice water better than rum. Her handwriting wobbles but keeps going. Here's your quirky tidbit. During these outbreaks, some Jamaicans believed that carrying a piece of nutmeg or camphor wrapped in cloth could block cholera spirits from entering through the mouth or nose. Others swore by drinking lime juice spiked with pepper. And yes, people still died clutching those charms. But belief is its own kind of medicine. The days blur into each other. You feel it in your bones. The repetition of boiling, stirring, praying. Mary doesn't flinch anymore when she sees the first signs, the blue lips, the trembling hands. She moves faster now, calmer, like she's learned the rhythm of crisis. Still, there's a weight behind her eyes. You catch her once, looking toward the harbor, where ships sit like ghosts on the horizon. She whispers, "If I could go somewhere colder, maybe I'd stop sweating and start thinking." You can't tell if she's joking or dreaming. Maybe both. Historians still argue whether this particular outbreak was the one that transformed her from a gifted helper into something more, a healer with her own authority. But it's clear this was her crucible. She was no longer just her mother's shadow. She was someone who could stand alone in a room full of suffering and not break. You trail her through the days that follow, through the constant washing and tending. The house becomes a beacon in the dark, a place where people bring the sick because the Grants know what to do. That reputation spreads faster than the disease. One night, a man stumbles in carrying his wife. Mary grabs the bowl before her mother even speaks. The water clock on the table ticks steadily. Drip, drip, drip. A rhythm she's begun to trust. She mixes ginger, mint, salt, and sugar into a crude rehydration drink. The woman lives. Barely, but she lives. It's the first time Mary truly smiles in days. "It worked," she murmurs, like someone discovering fire. Outside, rain begins to fall. Cool, heavy, cleansing. You both step out onto the porch to breathe it in. The scent of wet soil and crushed leaves fills the air, mingling with smoke from the burned linens. Kingston smells like rebirth. When the outbreak finally ends, the city feels emptied out. Streets that once sang now whisper. Mary and her mother walk through the quiet market square, carrying bundles of herbs to restock. People nod in gratitude. A few even bow. Mrs. Grant sighs. "They'll forget by next year," she says. "They always do." Mary looks around. "Then I'll just have to remind them." There's pride in her tone, not arrogance, but a promise. Back home, she packs away her notebook carefully. You peek at the pages. Small observations, patient notes, a few doodles of herbs and bottles. In one corner, she's drawn a tiny ship. Beneath it, she's written, "Next time, farther." The rain stops. The harbor gleams under a bruised sunset. You can almost feel the story shifting underfoot. The child who once followed orders now knows too much to stay still. And as you drift towards sleep beside her, you can hear her mother humming softly inside, an old Creole lullaby that somehow sounds both like farewell and blessing. You wake to the smell of salt, tar, and promise. The air feels different now, not the heavy, sun-stilled air of Kingston, but something open, salted and alive. The deck creaks beneath you. The horizon stretches wider than any street Mary Grant has ever known. And the girl beside you, older, tougher, but with the same restless glint in her eye, isn't content to just heal the sick anymore. She's chasing horizons. New Providence first, she says to no one in particular, squinting toward the turquoise line that's beginning to sharpen into islands. Her hands, calloused from grinding herbs, grip the ship's railing like they might wring a cure out of the sea itself. You lean beside her, listening to gulls circle lazily overhead. Around you, sailors shout orders, barrels roll, ropes creak. Mary's on her first real voyage abroad, Jamaica fading behind her like a fever dream, and you can feel her pulse quicken at the thought of what waits ahead. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the early 19th century, trade and travel among the Caribbean islands were booming. Kingston's harbor was a gateway for ships heading to places like Havana, Nassau, and Cartagena. Merchants, missionaries, and soldiers crossed the same waters where Mary now stands, though not many of them were women traveling alone. But Mary Seacole, she's still Mary Grant at this point, doesn't exactly ask permission. You trail her into the small cabin she shares with a merchant's wife, where she's sorting through her trunk. Bandages, herbs, bottles of rum, spices, and a handful of coins wrapped in cloth. Each item tells a story. The ginger root is for nausea, the peppercorns for infection, the rum for, well, morale. And if all else fails, she mutters with a grin, rum helps with everything else too. The ship rocks gently, like it's agreeing. The sea days roll on, each one painted in sunlight and boredom. Mary finds ways to stay busy, checking on seasick passengers, helping the cook keep the galley clean, learning which spices the sailors trade like gold dust. At night, she listens to their stories. Shipwrecks, love lost in ports, storms that speak in tongues. You catch her smiling when they say she's brave to sail so young, but you also see the way she tucks those compliments away like rare coins, useful, but not for spending yet. When the ship docks in Nassau, she steps off the gangplank into a crush of color and noise. Market stalls shimmer with silver fish and red chilies. Fabrics bright enough to hurt your eyes. The sun feels sharper here, like it's been polished. Mary moves through the crowd with the calm assurance of someone who's seen real sickness and knows how fragile the human body can be. She buys herbs she's never seen before, smelling, tasting, guessing their uses, and exchanges notes with a local midwife who teaches her about crushed coral poultices for fever and coconut oil salves for burns. You can see her world expanding, ingredient by ingredient. Here's your quirky tidbit. Sailors in the 1800s sometimes used powdered coral mixed with rum as a makeshift toothpaste. It didn't work well, and it probably eroded more teeth than it saved, but they swore by it anyway. Mary watches one man scrubbing away at his gums and mutters, "If that's medicine, I'm a mermaid." From Nassau, she sails to Cuba, where Havana's streets hum with music and mosquitoes. The air smells of coffee beans and smoke. She visits apothecaries, listens to surgeons argue in Spanish, learns new combinations of old remedies. When a fever sweeps through the dockside lodgings, she helps a local healer apply citrus and vinegar compresses, humming quietly as she works. Historians still argue whether this period, these Caribbean wanderings, were what shaped her later medical genius or just her wanderlust. Did she travel to heal, or heal so she could keep traveling? You might say both. Mary herself would shrug and say she was simply learning the world. By the time she sails back toward Jamaica, she's changed. You can feel it. Her notebook is thicker now, the pages crowded with recipes, cures, and tiny doodles of bottles and bones. Her hands are steady, her eyes sharper. On the ship home, a storm hits. Tropical, furious, unrestrained. Rain lashes the deck, and sailors curse into the wind. Mary doesn't hide below. She ties her shawl tighter and helps secure a barrel that's rolling loose. The captain yells at her to stay clear. She just grins and shouts back, "You'll have to catch me first." When the storm passes, the ocean stretches out again. Calm, endless, silver under moonlight. She leans against the railing, soaked but smiling, her braid plastered against her back. You can almost hear her thinking, if I can survive that, what can't I survive? The ship glides into Kingston Harbor days later, but the city feels smaller now. The streets she once thought wide seem narrow, the hills closer. Her mother's house is the same, but she's not the same person walking into it. She tells stories of the midwives in Havana, the coral powders in Nassau, the new ways of mixing lemon and salt to fight fevers. Her mother listens, proud but worried. "You've got the sea in your veins now," she says quietly. "It doesn't leave easy." Mary laughs. "Then I suppose I'll just keep sailing until it does." There's no reply to that, only the soft sound of waves outside and the smell of supper in the air. That night she can't sleep. She gets up and goes to the veranda, her notebook open under the flickering lamplight. The ink glows like a promise. She writes a line at the bottom of a page. "The world is wide and I am not afraid of it. The crickets hum. The waves whisper. The world feels like it's waiting. And you sitting there beside her in the dark can sense it too. The pull of history quietly turning its first wheel." You wake to the sound of hammers and laughter. Not in a ship's hold this time, but in Kingston again, where the air is thick with spice and sawdust. You blink and realize years have passed. Mary Grant isn't the curious girl from the herb garden anymore. She's a woman now, standing in her mother's doorway, with her sleeves rolled up and a gleam in her eye that says she's about to change her life again. There's music drifting from the harbor, the smell of molasses, and a tall, wiry man balancing an account book under one arm. His name is Mary Seacole, merchant, sometimes gambler, full-time charmer. And if you've been paying attention, you can probably guess how this will go. They meet, as most good stories start, over business and banter. Mary's running errands for her mother's boarding house when she bumps into Edwin, who's haggling over crates of sugar with a dock clerk. "You'd make more profit if you didn't argue about every penny," she teases, glancing at his ledger. He grins, not at all offended. "And you'd make less fun if you didn't," he shoots back. It's the kind of exchange that feels destined, or at least cinematic. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mary married Edwin Horatio Seacole sometime in the late 1830s, though the records are fuzzy. Historians still argue whether their marriage was one of deep love or practical partnership. What's clear is that they shared an entrepreneurial streak, and perhaps just as importantly, and equal stubbornness. Their home becomes part clinic, part business hub. Edwin deals in imported goods, and Mary tends to the sick. You watch her juggling ledgers and poultices, trading advice with ship surgeons 1 hour and mixing pepper tea the next. In a world that expects women to stay behind the scenes, she's very much in front of it. And there's laughter, always laughter. You hear it spilling out into the courtyard as Mary teases Edwin about his creative bookkeeping. "You call that profit?" she says, pointing at a column. "I call it optimism." He winks, replying, "Optimism is how I married you." You almost want to stay in that moment. Bright, young, easy. But life, as Mary is about to learn, doesn't hold still. A fever sweeps through Kingston again. Not cholera this time, but malaria, yellow-eyed and persistent. Mary's at the bedside day and night, administering quinine, cool cloths, and prayers. Edwin falls ill, and for the first time, the woman who's nursed hundreds finds herself powerless. He doesn't recover. When it's over, the house is quiet, too quiet. You can almost hear the echo of their laughter fading between the walls. The boarding house feels too big now, the bed too cold. She moves slowly for weeks, wrapping herself in chores, the way other people wrap themselves in blankets. It's tempting to call this a breaking point, but Mary isn't built that way. She tells herself that grief and work can share the same table. She pours her focus into the patients who keep coming. Sailors, soldiers, mothers. The island's still full of need, and her hands still know what to do. And then one afternoon, while tending to a feverish merchant, she overhears talk of ships heading north, to Panama, to the edge of the world where fortunes are made and fever rules the jungle. She listens without meaning to, but her pulse starts to match the rhythm of the man's voice. Panama. The word tastes like possibility. Her mother warns her, "That place will eat you alive." Mary just smiles. "It'll have to catch me first." Here's your quirky tidbit. In those days, the Panama route was considered one of the most dangerous crossings in the Western Hemisphere. Not because of pirates or storms, but because of disease. Yellow fever and cholera struck travelers faster than the ships could unload their cargo. Locals called the region the graveyard of ambition. Mary hears that nickname and grins like someone hearing a challenge. She sells what she can, stores her herbs in tightly sealed jars, and packs a small chest of spices and linens. The neighbors gossip, a widow traveling alone, but she shrugs it off. She's been defying expectations since before she could spell them. Historians still argue whether she was running from grief or toward adventure. You can feel it's both. The night before she sails, she stands on the veranda, notebook open under the moonlight, and writes, "Work is my prayer. Motion is my mercy." It's the kind of line that could sound dramatic, unless you've lived it. The next morning, the harbor is chaos again. Crates, ropes, shouting, gulls. Mary stands amid it all in her wide-brimmed straw hat and russet dress, a tiny figure against the blue expanse. She's not young anymore, not naive, but there's that look again, the one you saw when she first stepped onto the deck for Nassau, the look that says, "If the world's big, I'll need to see all of it." She boards with nothing but her trunk, her herbs, and a stubborn refusal to sit still. The ship pulls away, the coastline shrinking, the horizon wide open. You lean on the rail beside her. The air smells like salt and new beginnings. She's quiet for a long while, watching waves slap against the hull. Finally, she says, almost to herself, "If life is kind, it gives you work. If it's cruel, it gives you rest. I'll take the work." The ship groans, the sea stretches, and somewhere deep in your chest you realize you're watching someone who doesn't just survive history. She builds it, one port at a time. When the sails catch the wind, Mary tilts her face toward the sun, and for the first time in months, she smiles without effort. The world tips again, and suddenly you're in motion, on a ship cutting through humid air that smells of salt, sugar, and possibility. The widow Seacole stands at the railing, hands steady, eyes forward. Her grief has been folded neatly into her trunk, next to the herbs and jars she refuses to travel without. You can tell she's decided. She won't let stillness win. Panama awaits, a thin, restless strip of land connecting oceans and tempting dreamers. It's the 1850s and the California gold rush has spilled southward. Thousands of fortune seekers are crossing the isthmus to reach the Pacific, turning quiet towns into chaotic way stations. To them, it's a shortcut. To Mary, it's a new frontier. You step off the boat with her into Cruces, a town that feels half alive, half feverish. Mules bray, sailors shout, and every building looks both temporary and eternal. Built in a hurry, standing through stubbornness. The air is sticky, a mix of sweat and rain and tobacco, and everywhere, the whisper of sickness. Mary sets up shop almost immediately. One side sells stew, coffee, and preserved ginger to travelers. The other side, tonics and tinctures for the unlucky ones, doubled over in pain. You can't sell to the living, she jokes dryly, if you don't help them stay that way. Her table is a kind of miracle. Steam rising from kettles, herbs hanging from rafters, copper cups glinting in candlelight. You watch her move between patients with the ease of long habit. There's no fuss, no fear, just the brisk competence of someone who's seen worse. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Panama, during the mid-19th century, was a vital crossing for travelers heading to California before the transcontinental railway existed. The route was faster than sailing around Cape Horn, but far deadlier. Cholera and yellow fever flourished there, killing thousands who sought gold and glory. Mary becomes the calm inside that storm. She treats miners, mule drivers, sailors, soldiers, anyone desperate enough to try her remedies. Some swear by her mustard poultices. Others claim her pepper tea could scare a fever right out of the body. There's one traveler, a young man from Boston, who tries to pay her in promises. "I'll send gold from California," he says, voice trembling. Mary chuckles softly, wiping his forehead. "I prefer payment that doesn't melt in fever," she replies. He dies that night, and she spends her morning writing a short note to his mother. Careful, tender, the kind of letter she's written too many times before. But life isn't all tragedy. There are bright mornings too, those soft hours before the heat rises, when she sits outside with a bowl of porridge and listens to the parrots shout like gossiping neighbors. Sometimes muleteers stop by just to talk. "You could run a hotel," one says, gesturing at the busy yard. She laughs. "I already do. It just serves medicine instead of rum." Historians still argue whether her presence in Panama was mostly medical or mercantile, whether she went as a nurse or as a businesswoman. But the truth, as you can see now, is both. She sells what keeps people alive. Here's your quirky tidbit. In her free time, which, let's be honest, barely exists, she collects small curiosities from passing travelers. Foreign coins, shells, scraps of newspaper. She calls them remedies for boredom, claiming laughter and novelty are as healing as quinine. You can picture her showing a seasick miner a pressed flower and saying, "See, the world has beauty yet." Then one afternoon, the rains come. Not polite British drizzle, torrential, drumming, unrelenting rain that turns paths to rivers and roofs into sieves. The sky darkens until even midday feels like midnight. You and Mary rush to move supplies higher, splashing through knee-deep water as thunder cracks overhead. By morning, half the town has vanished, washed downriver or swallowed by mud. But the clinic still stands, half drowned and defiantly alive. Mary wrings out her apron and laughs. "Well," she sighs, "the Lord gives water, and Panama gives too much." In the weeks that follow, she rebuilds with the same stubborn rhythm. Cook, treat, rest, repeat. Sometimes she hums the Jamaican lullabies her mother used to sing. They sound out of place here among the howler monkeys, but comforting all the same. A British traveler passing through writes about her in his journal. A remarkable woman, commanding as any officer, cheerful as a saint. I believe she could heal you by scolding alone. You can't help smiling at that. It feels accurate. Months roll into years. The gold seekers keep coming, the sick keep falling, and Mary keeps them both fed and breathing. The townsfolk start calling her the yellow woman with the black magic hands, though she insists her hands are only ordinary, just trained to do what's needed. Still, when fever rages through the camps again, people travel miles to find her. You see them lined up outside, some clutching their stomachs, others their wallets. She treats both kinds of pain. Sometimes in the quiet moments between patients, she gazes out toward the jungle where the river disappears into fog. You know that look. It's the same one she wore when she left Kingston, when she buried Edwin, when she first decided to cross an ocean. It's the look of someone whose map is still unfolding. The sun sets one evening over Cruces, spilling pink light over the tin roofs. Mary closes the shutters, wipes her brow, and smiles at you faintly. "It's good work," she murmurs, "but it's not all of it. There's something bigger waiting." She doesn't say it yet, but you can feel the pull of another horizon, the one where cannons thunder instead of parrots, where the wounded call louder than the fevered. Somewhere far away, the Crimean War is brewing, and history is about to knock on her door again. For now, though, she lets herself rest. The rain has stopped. The frogs begin their song. You both sit there on the steps, letting the warm night fold around you. And for a moment, even the restless soul of Mary Seacole seems content to simply breathe. You wake again to the rattle of cartwheels, the call of muleteers, and the damp scent of the jungle after rain. The fever season has arrived in Panama, and Mary Seacole, your Mary, ever fearless, ties her headscarf tighter and rolls up her sleeves. Everywhere, people cough, sweat, shiver. The Gold Rush Trail has become a parade of the sick. Fever doesn't discriminate. It takes prospectors, sailors, even the clerks who came chasing quick fortunes. And Mary, armed with a mortar, pestle, and an alarming amount of pepper, decides she's not afraid of it. She's seen this before. Cholera, yellow fever, diseases that drain color from faces and courage from hearts. But in her small cantina clinic, she fights back with everything she's got. Boiled water, vinegar rags, mustard poultices, and broth so strong you can smell the marrow from the door. If the broth can wake the dead, she jokes, it should at least convince the living to stay. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the 1850s, the Panama Crossing was infamous for disease. Thousands perished while traveling the isthmus, long before the Panama Canal was even imagined. Fever claimed so many that ships often departed half empty, carrying more sorrow than cargo. Mary becomes the unofficial doctor of cruises. There's no license, no hospital ward, just a shack of wood and hope. She moves from cot to cot, adjusting pillows, counting pulses, scolding patients into drinking more water. The muleteers call her the Yellow Woman, not for her color, but for the golden kerchief she always wears, a bright flag of care in a weary land. Sometimes she sings while she works, old Jamaican lullabies about rivers and rain. The patients listen through fever dreams, murmuring along with the choruses. She swears rhythm helps recovery. Maybe she's right. You can almost feel the pulse of the song smoothing their breathing. But there are nights when even songs fail. One evening, she kneels beside a young sailor burning with yellow fever. She's done everything: cold cloths, lemon water, prayers, and still his eyes glaze over. When he dies, she closes them gently, sighs and whispers, "Well, love, may your next voyage be calmer." Then she stands and goes to the next bed. There are no pauses here. Historians still argue whether her methods were more Creole or Western, whether her remedies belong to science or tradition. The truth, as always, sits in the middle. She learned from her mother, from doctors, from failure. Her medicine is patchwork, like the empire itself, but stitched with compassion stronger than any thread. Here's your quirky tidbit. Mary swears by a remedy that would make modern pharmacists faint: burnt brandy with garlic and red pepper mixed with camphor. She calls it her universal persuader. It apparently persuades even reluctant fevers to leave. You imagine the smell alone could chase anything, including guests. Outside, life continues. Miners still argue over nuggets of fool's gold. Traders haggle. Children chase chickens through the mud. But around Mary's hut, there's a quiet gravity. People know that if you collapse on the road, she'll come. They trust her more than the official doctors who arrive, diagnose, and disappear. One day, she hears of a new outbreak along the Gorgona Trail, men collapsing before they even reach the river crossing. She doesn't hesitate. You follow her through the thickets, her basket swinging at her hip, the air thick with the whine of mosquitoes. She's muttering about logistics: clean water, spare linen, soup ingredients. "The gods can handle the miracle," she says, "but I'll handle the details." By the time you reach the camp, the scene is grim. Dozens lie in the shade, lips cracked, eyes distant. Mary squats beside the first one, checks his pulse, then sets about boiling water on a makeshift fire. "If I can't cure them," she murmurs, "at least I'll comfort them." The day drags into night. You see her face lit by firelight, streaked with sweat, steady as ever. Around midnight, one of the mule drivers collapses, and she shouts orders like a general. "Water, quick! And if you can't find clean, find less dirty." Even exhaustion seems to obey her. At dawn, she finally rests against a tree, eyes half closed. You think she's asleep until she speaks. "You know," she says softly, "I don't fear death, but I do hate poor bookkeeping." She nods toward her worn ledger, where she's recorded each patient's name, symptoms, and outcome. Even in chaos, she keeps order. It's her way of making sure no one vanishes completely. When she returns to Cruces, her patients cheer. The town feels smaller now, part clinic, part community, all orbiting around her relentless energy. Someone paints a sign above her door. "La Señora Doctora." Mary laughs until she cries. "Doctor? Only if you count soup as surgery." Later, as the rains begin again, she sits by lamplight, writing letters to her brother in Kingston. She tells him of her work, her patience, her endless battle against mud and fever, and she wonders, though she doesn't yet know it, if the next war she joins will have uniforms instead of fever rags. The lantern flickers, the jungle hums, and Mary Seacole, widow, healer, wanderer, falls asleep for once, not from grief or duty, but from sheer, bone-deep fatigue. Morning comes hot and heavy in Cruces. The rain has washed the mud from the road, but the smell of sickness still lingers, tangled with wood smoke and sweet tamarind. You wake to find Mary already at work, stirring a cauldron that hisses like an impatient kettle. Steam curls around her face as she throws in peppers, herbs, and bones with brisk precision. Her little cantina is a blur of contradictions, half shop, half clinic, half miracle. There's a wooden counter cluttered with bottles of castor oil, ginger, vinegar, and rum. A shelf stacked with biscuits and salted fish for travelers. And behind it all, a small table where patients wait for her no-nonsense care. The sign above the door, hand-painted and slightly crooked, reads Mrs. Seacole's House of Comfort. You glance around at her customers. A miner with a twisted ankle argues the price of soup with a mule driver whose hands shake from fever. Two women from Jamaica gossip near the doorway, their laughter soft and familiar. It's chaos, yes, but the warm kind. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the early 1850s, Panama was the crucial shortcut between oceans. Before the canal existed, travelers crossed this narrow strip of land to move from the Atlantic to the Pacific, chasing dreams of California gold. But disease made that dream perilous. The route through Cruces and Gorgona became notorious for cholera, dysentery, and heat stroke. And amid this turmoil, Mary's cantina thrived as both refuge and remedy. You watch her work like she's conducting a symphony, ladle, cloth, laughter, scold. She moves between patients and patrons with seamless rhythm. A feverish prospector tries to pay with a gold nugget. She waves it off. Keep your rock, love. Come back when it sings. Then, turning to another man complaining about prices, she adds, "If I charge you less, I'll have to sell you to the mosquitoes." Her humor keeps the despair at bay. Even when her patients worsen, she refuses to let silence settle too long. Sometimes she tells tall tales about her nurse training, saying she studied under an ancient Egyptian who once cured mummies. Nobody believes her, but everyone laughs, and that's half the medicine. Still, business must balance compassion. Between the cots and soup pots, Mary keeps ledgers, ink-stained records of debts, rations, and treatments. She knows exactly how many onions went missing last week and how many spoons of quinine she has left. You see her pause mid-stir to jot something down on a scrap of paper, lips moving as she counts. "A nurse with no math," she says, "is a kindness short of sense." The quirky tidbit of the day, Mary has adopted a parrot named Nelson, green, foul-mouthed, and entirely too proud. The bird mimics her patients, coughing dramatically or shouting, "Drink your broth," in her own Jamaican accent. The laughter he provokes is worth more than medicine. Sometimes in the quiet hours, she swears he talks to her properly. "If he starts writing prescriptions," she says, "I'll retire." Evening drapes itself over the town. Lanterns flicker. Music drifts from a nearby cantina. You and Mary sit outside for a moment, sipping tea that tastes faintly of cinnamon and mud. "It's strange," she muses, "how helping others fills what grief empties." Her eyes glint in the low light. Tired, yes, but peaceful. Historians still argue whether Mary Seacole saw herself as a businesswoman or a humanitarian first. Some point to her ledgers and profits, others to her sleepless nights tending strangers. You, watching her balance both roles with grace, suspect the answer is both. To her, the ledger and the patient are two halves of the same whole. Order and empathy working hand in hand. The next morning brings another test. A caravan of travelers arrives, exhausted and burned by the sun. Among them, a young woman collapses in the doorway, her dress soaked through. Mary kneels, checks her pulse, and nods for help. Within minutes, the place transforms into a hospital. She barks orders: hot cloths, vinegar, water, and everyone obeys, even the grumpy miner who usually argues over prices. The parrot squawks commands too, though less helpfully. After hours of tending, the fever breaks. Mary smiles, wipes her brow, and mutters, "You see, even death has manners. It knows better than to argue with me." Later, as the last patient sleeps, she counts her coins by lamplight. There's barely enough for next week's supplies. She shrugs, tucks the coins away, and whispers, "We'll make do." She always does. When storms roll in days later, flooding the roads, she refuses to close. You watch her wade knee-deep in water, handing out bread and blankets to stranded muleteers. "The Lord gives us rain," she says, "and I give out towels." The sound of thunder mingles with laughter and song from the cantina. Mary sits beside the door, sipping rum and humming a lullaby you recognize from her childhood in Jamaica. For a moment you glimpse something sacred in her tired smile, an understanding that healing isn't about conquering pain, but sitting beside it until it softens. The night ends as it always does. Lanterns dim, the parrot snores, and the road quiets under the dripping trees. Mary leans back in her chair, ledger balanced on her knee, and writes a final note. All accounted for except time, and time, I suppose, keeps its own books. You breathe out, matching her rhythm, the hum of rain, the faint clink of glass, the heartbeat of a woman who turned a roadside tavern into a temple of care. You've lost track of how many dawns have passed in Panama. The days blur together, fever, soup, laughter, ledgers. And yet something in Mary begins to shift. The gold rush traffic thins, the rains grow relentless, and whispers of war drift across the Caribbean like smoke. It's 1854, and the word Crimea means little to most Panamanians. But to Mary Seacole, it means everything. A new frontier for her stubborn compassion. You sit beside her one humid afternoon as she folds a letter from a sailor just returned from London. His stories of battlefields, of cholera in the camps, of soldiers dying far from home, stir something deep inside her. "If there's need," she says quietly, "then there's work for me." That's your mainstream historical fact. When the Crimean War broke out between Russia and the Ottoman Empire, Britain and France joined in. The fighting raged on the Black Sea Peninsula, but the deadliest enemy wasn't musket fire, it was disease. Thousands of soldiers perished not from wounds but from infections, cholera, and dysentery. Mary reads the reports like a challenge. She imagines the British camps, the mud, the chaos, the smell of blood and smoke, and thinks of all the lives her pepper tea and herbal compresses might save. But traveling to war is no small matter for a middle-aged, mixed-race widow with no formal credentials. "They'll tell me no," she says, "but they'll still need me." You follow her back to Kingston to make preparations. The old house creaks with memory. Her mother's apothecary jars line neatly, the faint scent of bay rum and vinegar lingering in the air. Mary moved from shelf to shelf, choosing carefully dried ginger, camphor, mustard, and vinegar. Medicine and courage, she murmurs. Everything else, I'll improvise. Outside, the port bustles with ships. A donkey cart rattles by, carrying barrels of molasses. Children run barefoot along the docks, laughing. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythm of island life, something solemn beats, a farewell of sorts. She writes letters, so many letters, to the War Office, the Army, the Medical Board. Each one is polite, factual, persuasive. She explains her experience, her past work in epidemics, her skill with both European and Creole remedies. And then she waits. Weeks pass, no replies. When the first rejections arrive, they are couched in careful phrases. Regret to inform. Positions already filled. She shows you the papers with a wry smile. They don't say I'm unqualified, she notes. They say nothing at all. Historians still argue whether her race or her gender weighed heavier against her. Both, probably. Victorian bureaucracy had a way of turning humanity into paperwork, but Mary doesn't waste time sulking. If the door won't open, she says, then I'll build a new house. You watch her count out her savings. Neatly folded pounds, worn American dollars, even a few Spanish coins from Panama. It's not enough. Not yet. So she sells the last of her stock, the furniture, the donkey cart, even Nelson the parrot, who fetches an absurdly high price, probably because he curses in 3 dialects. He'll make someone laugh, she sighs. And that's medicine, too. A few friends contribute what they can. A merchant offers passage on a ship bound for England. It'll be cold, he warns. It always is, she replies. The quirky tidbit, Mary insists on packing a crate labeled essentials. Inside, you find bandages, herbs, and an entire case of Caribbean spices. The English food will need saving, she declares solemnly. You suspect she's half joking, only half. The voyage is long. The air cools day by day as the ship heads north. Mary stands on deck, scarf wrapped tight, eyes fixed on the gray horizon. She practices her English accent under her breath, smoothing the edges of her Jamaican rhythm, but never erasing it entirely. Polish, not vanish, she says. There's pride in my vowels. When London finally appears, foggy, immense, and indifferent, it feels like another planet. Gas lamps flicker in the dusk, carriages rattle over cobblestones, and the air smells of coal and rain. You can almost hear the city's pulse, fast, mechanical, self-assured. Mary takes it all in with quiet awe. So this, she says, is the belly of the empire. She finds lodging near Soho and sets about knocking on every official door that might lead to Crimea. The War Office, the medical department, the nursing fund. Everywhere, polite men in dark coats frown, shuffle papers, and send her away. One even tells her, the front is no place for a lady of color. She leaves before he can see her tears. That night, you sit with her by the fire. She unwraps a piece of dried ginger, chews it slowly, and says, when people say no enough times, you start to hear the word wait. But I've never been good at waiting. So she stops asking for permission. By spring, her plan has changed. She will fund herself. Supplies, transport, staff, whatever it takes. I'm going, she declares, and if the army won't carry me, I'll carry myself. Her conviction fills the room like incense. You realize, watching her, that this is the moment the legend of Mary Seacole is truly born, not in war, but in defiance. As she packs for the journey east, you glance again at her worn notebook. It's filled with recipes, measurements, and the occasional doodle of a bottle or a loaf of bread. At the bottom of one page, she's written a small, almost invisible line. "Where there is sickness, I belong." You close the book gently. The ink smudges your thumb. The message stays. London doesn't so much wave goodbye as it exhales, gray and tired, as Mary Seacole boards the ship bound for the east. The year is 1855. The air smells of salt and soot, and the dock hands move like clockwork, ropes creaking, barrels rolling, gulls crying overhead. You stand with her at the rail as the city fades into a smear of fog. She's dressed in her travel best, indigo shawl, sturdy boots, and that stubborn sparkle in her eyes that could outshine the North Star. "Let's see if the world's ready for me now," she mutters, and you're not sure whether it's a prayer or a challenge. The voyage to Constantinople is long, stitched together by restless nights and the slap of waves against wood. You pass through Gibraltar, where Mary stands watching the great rock loom in the mist. She's unbothered by the seasickness that fells half the passengers. Instead, she dispenses ginger tea and advice. "Lie flat," she tells a green-faced officer. "Pretend you're already in your coffin. It helps." The poor man can't decide whether to laugh or vomit. Your first mainstream historical fact drifts in on the breeze. The Crimean War by now has become infamous for its mismanagement. Supply shortages, disease, and bureaucratic blunders plagued the British Army. Florence Nightingale's name has begun to echo through the empire as the lady with the lamp, but the need for medical hands is still desperate. Mary doesn't know Florence personally, not yet, but she knows the kind of woman who thrives amid disaster. "She'll have her light," she says. "I'll have my kitchen fire." When the ship docks in Constantinople, the city feels like a living mosaic. Domes, minarets, the smell of spice and smoke. Mary spends a few days there, mingling with British officers and traders. The bazaars dazzle her. The hospitals depress her. She hears tales from Balaclava and Sevastopol, camps thick with mud and misery, men freezing in rags, surgeons sawing through limbs by lantern light. "Then that's where I'm going," she decides. You help her gather crates, flour, sugar, salt beef, vinegar, rice, pepper, mustard, preserved fruit, rum, medical stores, and endless rolls of calico. The dockmaster stares at her list. "You're outfitting an army, ma'am." She smiles. "No, dear, just one woman who knows how to feed one." The quirky tidbit here, among her cargo is a tin of curry powder she mixed herself. She swears it can cure seasickness, lift spirits, and season anything from stew to poultice. The British can survive cannonball, she says, but not their own bland cooking. The smaller ship from Constantinople to Balaclava is a test of patience and stomach. The sea near the Black Sea coast is rough, and the sailors swear in 5 languages. Mary, however, spends the days cooking for them. Salt pork and dumplings, seasoned with whatever she can barter. By the time the ship anchors off Crimea, even the captain calls her Mother. When you first see the coastline, it's nothing like the tropical blues of Jamaica or Panama. Here the land rises gray and brown, scarred by trenches, dotted with tents. Smoke hangs low over the hills, smelling of gunpowder and damp wool. Mary tightens her shawl and steps onto the shore, her boots sinking into mud. This is Balaclava, a town swollen with soldiers, horses, carts, and confusion. The British Army's supply lines choke with mismanagement. Men trudge past, their uniforms stiff with dirt. The hospitals overflow, and yet, amid the bleakness, Mary's eyes light up. "So this," she whispers, "is where I'm meant to be." She finds lodging in a wooden hut and immediately starts helping wherever she can. She brews tea for frostbitten soldiers, distributes biscuits, offers mustard plasters to those too weak to move. Within hours, word spreads. There's a kind woman from Jamaica who knows how to heal and cook. The soldiers begin calling her Mother Seacole. Historians still argue whether the name was given in affection or awe. Either way, it sticks. A few officers, impressed by her efficiency, offer her space to open a small canteen. But Mary dreams bigger. She sketches a plan, a proper building, halfway between a hotel, a kitchen, and a clinic. The British Hotel, she names it, and the words taste sweet as victory. The logistics are nightmarish. Supplies are scarce. Prices are absurd, and men keep trying to talk her out of it. Too dangerous, Mrs. Seacole. Too far from the lines. Too much trouble. She smiles through every warning. Gentlemen, she says, you've mistaken me for someone sensible. Over the next weeks, you help her hire carpenters, rough men from the regiments, paid in rum and soup. They hammer together a structure of wood and corrugated iron, sturdy enough to face Crimean winds. Each morning begins with clanging pots and shouting. Each evening ends with music drifting from the soldier camp. By the time the roof goes on, the sun is sharp and white, glaring over a land that's forgotten peace. Mary stands back, wiping her brow with a scrap of linen. There, she says, admiring her handiwork, a place to rest, eat, and remember home. Inside, she arranges shelves of preserves, bolts of cloth, candles, buttons, and bottles of sherry. Behind the counter, she keeps a small chest of medicines, ginger, mustard, vinegar, and powdered rhubarb. For the stomach and the spirit, she tells the men. When she finally hangs the hand-painted sign, the British Hotel, Mrs. Seacole proprietress, you feel something shift. It's more than pride, it's reclamation. Later, as night falls and the hills rumble with distant cannon fire, you sit beside her on a wooden crate. She sips from a tin mug of wine, staring out at the stars. Funny, she murmurs, how the world tries to keep you in your place. But sometimes if you keep walking, you find the place was waiting for you all along. A gust of wind scatters ash from a nearby campfire, glowing like tiny stars in the dark. The soldiers laugh somewhere beyond the ridge, their voices rough but alive. You look at Mary, silhouetted against the firelight, unbowed, uninvited, utterly unstoppable, and you think she didn't just travel halfway across the world, she redefined the map. The first morning at the British Hotel dawns gray and reluctant, like the sky itself isn't sure it wants to be awake. You stand beside Mary Seacole as she ties her apron, stiff linen over her indigo dress, and surveys the clutter that will soon become her domain. The tables are uneven, the shelves half-stocked, and the floor still smells faintly of sea crates and fresh-cut wood. Yet in her eyes, it's already perfect. People don't need perfection, she mutters, ladling oatmeal into a pot over the open fire. They need hot food and someone who gives a damn. By noon, the soldiers begin trickling in, muddy, limping, sunken-eyed. Some clutch their sides, others clutch coins. Mary greets them all the same way, with brisk warmth and no pity. You'll eat first, she says, then you'll tell me what hurts. The British Hotel hums to life. Smoke rises from the chimney, curling through the bitter Crimean wind. Inside, the air is thick with broth and laughter. Soldiers swap stories between spoonfuls of stew. An Irish private swears he's forgotten the taste of vegetables until now. Your first historical fact slides naturally into the room. Mary's establishment really did stand just outside Balaclava, a few miles from the front lines. It served as a storehouse, a restaurant, and an unofficial recovery ward for sick and injured soldiers. The British Army's supply lines were so poor that even officers came to her for essentials: shirts, boots, preserved meats, medicines. And Mary didn't gouge prices. She charged fair, sometimes even low. A man should pay for his pride, she'd say, but not for his pain. Behind the counter, the quirky tidbit of the day sits in a wooden bowl. Ginger candy Mary made herself. She claims it soothes both sore throats and homesickness. "Eat too," she says to a homesick corporal, "and think of sunshine." Outside, the war drags on. Cannons boom distantly, muffled by snow. The horses whicker nervously at every sound. Sometimes a cart rattles past, piled with bandaged men who moan quietly through the jolts. Mary watches them go, jaw tight. "I'll not sit here selling biscuits while men die for lack of a kind hand," she says. So she doesn't. You follow her as she trudges up the muddy road toward the battlefield, a satchel of supplies bouncing at her hip. Soldiers try to wave her back. "It's no place for a lady, ma'am," one shouts. She grins. "Good thing I left her at home." Up on the ridge, the world turns raw, mud and smoke. Cries and crows circling. The cold cuts through your gloves. Mary kneels beside a wounded man, wraps a bandage around his arm, and pours brandy between his lips. "Don't you dare die without eating," she scolds softly. He laughs or maybe coughs. It's hard to tell the difference in this chaos. Historians still argue whether she was technically part of the medical corps or an independent entrepreneur. Officially, she wasn't sanctioned, but unofficially, she was indispensable. Soldiers didn't care about paperwork. They care that she came when called. As she moves from one wounded soldier to the next, she hums under her breath, a habit she picked up long ago in her mother's Jamaican lodging house. A rhythmic, steady tune that keeps her grounded amid the madness. When she returns to the British hotel at dusk, her skirts are caked in mud, her sleeves stiff with dried blood. You expect her to collapse. Instead, she rolls up her sleeves again and starts kneading dough. "There's still supper to make," she says. That night, over a meal of mutton stew and flatbread, a few officers raise their cups. "To Mother Seacole," one toasts. The room echoes the name back, a chorus of weary affection. You watch her face, part pride, part disbelief. "I'm nobody's mother," she says afterward in private, "but I suppose I can borrow the title till they're better." Days blur into weeks. Snow becomes slush, and slush becomes dust. The war doesn't stop, but it slows, like a fever breaking. Each morning, Mary opens the shutters, lets in the thin sunlight, and begins again. One afternoon, a British colonel arrives, limping slightly. He's heard rumors, he says, of the Jamaican woman with better poultices than the army's doctors. Mary listens as he describes his wound, a shrapnel nick, festering. She cleans it with vinegar and a soft cloth, then applies a mustard plaster. He hisses through his teeth. "You're trying to kill me," she smirks. "Not today, Colonel." Later, he returns with a smile, the infection gone. He leaves behind a silver button from his uniform. "For your collection," he says. She keeps it on the shelf, beside the ginger jar. Quirky tidbit number 2. Mary really did treat high-ranking officers, including Lord Rokeby, commander of the British forces in Crimea. She often accepted small gifts, medals, coins, or buttons, as a payment when money was scarce. She never sold them, calling them souvenirs of pain and gratitude. As spring comes, the land around the British hotel bursts into improbable color. Wildflowers threading through the mud, vines creeping along the wooden walls. Mary plants herbs near the entrance, thyme, mint, and basil, because, as she says, the air should smell of healing, not of hurt. You can feel the rhythm returning. She brews tea for visitors, bandages sprains, trades jokes with the soldiers who once doubted her. One writes her a poem comparing her stew to divine intervention. Another carves her likeness on a canteen lid. She laughs at both but keeps them anyway. Every evening, as the sun bleeds red over the hills, she climbs a small rise to watch the horizon. The battlefield lies quiet now, pocked and scarred. She folds her hands and murmurs something you almost can't hear. Maybe it's a prayer, maybe just a promise to remember. One night, a courier delivers news. The war is winding down. The Treaty of Paris is being negotiated. The guns will soon fall silent. Around the camp, soldiers cheer, cry, or simply stare. Mary smiles faintly. "Peace, huh?" she says, as if testing the word for cracks. The next morning, she walks through her hotel one last time, touching the tables, the jars, the battered kettle. Every dent tells a story. Every stain is proof that she showed up. She steps outside, the dawn mist silvering the vineyard hills. "You think they'll remember me?" she asks quietly. You answer the only way you can, by knowing that someday, centuries later, someone will whisper her name into the dark and tell her story to help the world fall asleep. You wake to the rhythmic creak of a ship's mast and the slap of waves against the hull. Again. But this time, you're not sailing toward chaos. You're sailing home. The Crimean War is over, and with it, the endless days of cannon smoke, bandages, and broth. You stand beside Mary Seacole on the deck as the Black Sea fades behind her, a faint shimmer under the morning light. She leans on the railing, face unreadable. "Peace," she says softly. "It's not always as restful as they promise." By now, her name carries weight. Officers salute her, soldiers call her Mother. But fame, as Mary learns, doesn't always pay the bills. When she lands in London in the spring of 1856, she finds herself with more gratitude than gold. The British hotel's supplies, food, linens, even the wine, were bought with her own savings. Now it's all gone. The city greets her not with parades but with invoices. The air smells of coal smoke and wet cobblestones. London, grand as it is, feels colder than the Crimean wind. She rents a small room near Soho, its wallpaper curling like tired parchment. But her optimism, like her spice jars, travels well. "I've been broke before," she says, unpacking her mortar and pestle. "It never stopped me from living richly." Your historical fact for tonight. Upon her return, Mary Seacole was nearly bankrupt. Despite her service to British troops, she received no government pension or reimbursement. Only later would public support begin to stir. Still, she refuses despair. She writes letters to old friends, visits hospitals, and attends gatherings where people speak fondly of the angel of the Crimea. She never corrects them. Angels, she knows, don't eat stew or haggle with suppliers, but she'll take the compliment. One evening, she walks past a bookseller's window and sees Florence Nightingale's name printed in gold on a memoir about the war. Mary pauses, smiling faintly. "Good for her," she murmurs. "Someone ought to write mine." It's half a joke, but it lingers in her mind. The quirky tidbit you might enjoy. When Mary finally does publish her autobiography, she titles it, "The Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands." It's the first known travel memoir written by a Black woman in Britain, and it's full of warmth, wit, and unapologetic honesty. But we're not there yet. First comes the long, slow recovery. Mary visits convalescent soldiers in hospitals, bringing them small gifts, peppermint drops, jars of marmalade, once even a parrot she'd rescued from a dockside auction. "For company," she says, handing it over. The matron is scandalized. The soldiers are delighted. She spends afternoons writing recipes for tonics and plasters, experimenting with Jamaican herbs in her little kitchen. The smell of camphor and honey fills the air, chasing away the London damp. Sometimes she catches herself humming an old Kingston lullaby, soft and slow, just like her mother used to when stirring a cure for fever. Historians still argue whether Mary Seacole's medical methods were purely folk practice or a sophisticated fusion of traditional and European science. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle. She learned through observation, through failure, through years of watching the body's strange negotiations with pain. In those quiet weeks, she dreams often of the British hotel, its noise, its laughter, the steady stream of boots and voices. The stillness now feels too still. "Work is the best medicine," she tells a friend, and so she begins to write. She writes the way she speaks, plain, vivid, and with a wink. "I never intended to be a heroine," she begins, but one does not always have the luxury of intention. Each page smells faintly of ink and onion soup. She writes of her mother's lodging house, of Kingston's fevered summers, of Panama's mosquitoes, and of Balaclava's frozen mud. She writes of soldiers who sang to keep their spirits up, and of those who could not sing at all. She doesn't spare herself either. She admits her debts, her mistakes, her stubborn pride. Her publisher, a wiry Scotsman named James Blackwood, warns her that the market is crowded with war memoirs. "You'll need a hook," he says. "Something the public hasn't seen." Mary grins. "Then they shall see a woman who refused to wait for permission." When the book appears in 1857, the reviews are immediate and glowing. Punch magazine praises her humor and resilience. Readers send letters addressed simply to Mrs. Seacole, London, and somehow they all find her. She signs each one with a careful flourish, and then a miracle of sorts, a benefit festival in her honor. The soldiers she once fed and patched together organize it themselves. They rent the Royal Surrey Gardens, decorate it with banners reading "Welcome Home, Mother Seacole," and fill it with brass bands, beer tents, and laughter. You can almost hear the music, pipes and drums blending with the cries of hawkers and the soft shuffle of boots on the grass. Thousands attend. Officers bring their families. Widows bring flowers. Mary stands at the center, overwhelmed, a bright shawl draped around her shoulders. She tries to make a speech but chokes on the first word. Someone starts singing, "For she's a jolly good woman," and the crowd takes it up until her tears turn to laughter. Quirky tidbit number 2. That event really happened, organized in July 1857, raising enough money to clear Mary's debts. The papers described it as one of the most cheerful benefits London had ever seen. Afterward, she walks home with aching feet, but a light heart. For the first time in years, she feels secure. She's not wealthy, but she's free. The war, the debt, the endless struggle, they've all led her here, to a kind of quiet triumph. That night, she sets her book beside her bed and pours a small glass of port. "To the next adventure," she says aloud, though there's no one else in the room. Outside, the city hums, the rattle of carriages, the far-off bark of dogs, the endless pulse of London life. She smiles, closes her eyes, and lets the rhythm carry her into sleep. You think of how far she's come, from Kingston's herbal gardens to Panama's fever pits, from the chaos of war to the calm of print. The ledger is closed, the debt's repaid, but the story still beats quietly under the surface. And tomorrow, when she wakes, she'll begin again. Because for Mary Seacole, rest isn't the end of motion. It's the space between one act of courage and the next. The morning light over London feels softer now, less of a struggle, more of a sigh. You can almost hear the hum of printing presses somewhere in Fleet Street, still churning out copies of The Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands. The smell of fresh ink and damp paper drifts through the air, mixing with the aroma of roasted chestnuts from a nearby cart. Mary Seacole, at 53, walks along the street with that steady, no-nonsense stride she's carried since Kingston. Fame has found her again, this time through words. Her book travels faster than she ever could, carried in leather satchels, read aloud in parlors, quoted in drawing rooms. Some call her the Creole heroine. Others, more cautious Victorians, refer to her as a remarkable woman of color, which sounds like praise but drips with polite distance. Mary knows the difference, and she laughs anyway. They can call me what they like, she tells a friend, as long as they spell the name right. Your historical fact for this section: Mary's memoir became a bestseller in 1857, praised by critics and readers alike. It was one of the few Victorian autobiographies by a woman of African descent to gain mainstream success. She spends her afternoons answering fan letters. Some come from former soldiers who still remember her soup and scolding in balaclava. One man writes that her laugh could mend a soul faster than any medicine. She keeps that one pinned above her fireplace. Others come from young women, aspiring nurses, travelers, dreamers, asking how to live bravely. Mary replies to them all in the same warm tone: start by not asking permission. But London, ever the fickle beast, moves on. By 1860, new wars, new scandals, new heroines crowd the papers. Florence Nightingale continues her crusade for sanitation reform. Politicians debate empire and commerce. The public's attention, once fierce and adoring, softens and slips away. Mary adjusts gracefully. She takes on small ventures. A little boarding house here, a catering project there. Once, she partners with a retired officer to import Caribbean preserves. London needs more sunshine in jars, she jokes, arranging mango chutney and tamarind sauce on a wooden shelf. The business sputters, of course. Import taxes and leaky barrels will do that. But it doesn't matter. She's tasted worse failures and made feasts from less. Historians still argue whether Seacole saw herself primarily as a nurse or a businesswoman. In truth, she was both, seamlessly. The line between compassion and commerce for her was never a contradiction. It was survival. Her quirky tidbit tonight: Mary once attended a fancy charity ball hosted by the Duke of Wellington's family. The servants tried to direct her to the back entrance, assuming she was staff. Instead, she swept through the front doors in a gold-embroidered gown and introduced herself to half the aristocracy before anyone realized their mistake. She later told friends, "One must remind England now and then that warmth has many shades." In her 60s, her health begins to waver. Arthritis, the ghost of old fevers, a heart that occasionally flutters like a startled bird. Yet she remains bright-eyed. Friends visit her small home in Paddington, where the mantel is crowded with gifts: a Crimean medal, a carved gourd from Panama, a seashell painted with Mother Seacole, in faded ink. She keeps them all dusted and gleaming. When she reads the papers, she notices how her name appears less often, tucked between stories of empire, railways, and the nursing reformer Miss Nightingale. Sometimes it stings, but mostly she shrugs. "Let her have her hospitals," she says with a grin. "I had my hotel." By now she's begun lending her name to causes, hospitals for poor women, soldiers' funds, and schools for mixed-race children. She rarely makes speeches, preferring quiet gifts slipped into envelopes or the simple act of showing up. Presence, she says, is the truest form of medicine. You can picture her sitting by the window on a soft summer afternoon, writing a note to an old Crimean comrade. The pen scratches gently across the page. Outside, children shout. A cart rattles by. The scent of lilacs drifts in. She pauses to sip tea, her fingers trembling just slightly. "Still here," she mutters with a smile. "Still stubborn." Every so often, she dreams of Kingston, of her mother's garden, of the herb-scented breezes, of the warm hush before tropical rain. In the dream, she's young again, grinding roots into paste and humming. When she wakes, she feels both comforted and hollow. "A woman's heart," she says once to a visitor, "is a strange museum. It keeps everything, whether you ask it to or not." Her finances wobble again in her later years, the same cruel rhythm of success and scarcity. But she refuses pity. When friends suggest she apply for aid, she scoffs. "I've lived through cholera, war, and British bureaucracy. Poverty is just another patient." Yet the truth is, the ledger begins to tighten. She sells a few heirlooms. Her husband's watch, a silver serving spoon from Panama, even her old traveling cloak. Each item leaves quietly, without ceremony. And then, in 1871, the tides of fortune shift once more. The British Army Veterans Community petitions for her to receive the Crimean Medal and an annual pension. Newspapers pick up her story again, calling her the forgotten heroine. The public predictably falls in love anew. One reporter describes visiting her home. "She sat in a great chair like a queen retired from the world, her smile the same warm flame that once lit the tents of the Crimea." Mary reads that aloud to a friend, chuckling. "Queen retired. Imagine that." Another article praises her bravery and wit. She pins that one too, beside the letter from the soldier who'd called her laughter a cure. Her small house, with its crowded walls and teacup clutter, feels like a living scrapbook, each object a heartbeat from another time. Sometimes she reads passages from her own book aloud, not out of vanity, but memory. Her voice softens as she recalls the chaos of Balaclava, the boiling kettles, the laughter amid pain. She looks up afterward, eyes shining, and whispers, "We were alive there, weren't we?" You can feel the years gathering around her like twilight, gentle, inevitable, but golden. There's no bitterness, only a slow acceptance that stories fade and then sometimes return brighter than before. The donkey's gone, the satyrs replaced by the occasional cat that strays in from the alley, but she still speaks to them, to all the ghosts of her strange, extraordinary life. And as the city hums on, Mary Seacole sits quietly beneath a London sky that will one day forget her name, but not forever. Because names, like seeds, have a way of waiting for the right season to bloom again. Light that seems to hang suspended in the London air, warm, hesitant, and faintly dusted with gold. You're sitting by the window again, this time beside an aging Mary Seacole, who leans back in a deep chair upholstered in faded crimson. Her hands, once so quick and steady with bandages, tremble slightly as she lifts her teacup. But her gaze, oh, that's as sharp as ever. She still keeps her little rituals. Every morning, a servant opens the shutters just so, letting light hit the ivy outside her window, a tiny patch of green that reminds her of Jamaica. She greets it softly, "Morning, old friend." You imagine the vines answering back, whispering with leaves that have never known war or hardship. Her hair has silvered into soft curls, and her laugh, still hearty, still round, bursts out at least once every hour. She insists that laughter keeps the lungs healthy. "You can quote me on that," she says, tapping her chest with mock seriousness. The mainstream historical fact for this section: Mary Seacole spent her final years living comfortably in Paddington, supported by a modest pension and the kindness of friends and former soldiers. She was honored by veterans groups, celebrated at gatherings, and never once left behind her signature warmth. On some afternoons, she hosts tea for visitors, old comrades, curious journalists, a few young nurses who come seeking advice. They listen as she recalls Crimea, eyes wide, trying to imagine the chaos wrapped in her calm storytelling. "You mustn't think it was all bravery," she tells them, stirring her tea. "Mostly, it was stubbornness and good soup." One nurse asks what her greatest fear was back then. Mary thinks for a moment, then says, "Running out of clean towels." You both laugh. The nurse looks puzzled, but Mary winks at you, as if sharing a private joke across centuries. Historians still argue whether Seacole's reputation would have survived without her memoir, or if she'd have been erased entirely by the Victorian discomfort with women who didn't fit the mold. It's a fair debate, but here in this quiet parlor, the question doesn't matter. She's alive in her stories, in her own words, not as a shadow in someone else's footnotes. Her quirky tidbit: in these final years, Mary developed a fondness for her neighbor's cat, a plump tabby she called Admiral Nelson. The cat often sprawled on her lap during tea, purring through her monologues about empire, nursing, and the proper ratio of rum to sugar in a fever tonic. "He listens better than most men," she'd say. Her health, however, begins to falter. Arthritis stiffens her joints. Old fevers visit her again like unwelcome ghosts. Some mornings she stays in bed, watching sunlight crawl across the wall. "Still here," she murmurs, "but a little slower today." Even then, she refuses self-pity. When a friend frets over her condition, she grins. "Nonsense, I've had worse patients." And truly she has. You can almost hear echoes of soldiers calling for Mother Seacole. See her bustling through the British hotel, spooning broth, cracking jokes, wiping sweat from fevered brows. Once, when her nurse suggests she rest, Mary waves her off. "Rest is overrated," she says. "Besides, the world will rest long enough when I'm done." There's a deep quiet in her house now, filled not with loneliness, but with a strange serenity, as if time itself has softened. Her mantle gleams with small honors, medals, photographs, tokens of gratitude. But her favorite decoration is still the old Crimean teapot, dented and stained, its handle wrapped in cloth. "This one," she says fondly, "has seen more wars than most generals." You can picture her near dusk, leaning back, the day fading around her. She hums an old Jamaican song her mother once sang, a lullaby with no translation, just the melody of home. The tune drifts through the room like smoke, slow and tender. When letters arrive now, they are fewer but sweeter. A young soldier writes from India, saying he's heard tales of her courage. "If only we had another Mother Seacole here," he says. She smiles softly and replies with a shaky hand. "You already do, my dear. She's inside you, waiting for the right hour." The years taper gently like a candle burning low. The newspapers note her less often now, but the few who remember do so with warmth. A heroine of the empire, one obituary draft calls her. Mary scoffs when a friend reads it aloud. "Heroine is too grand. I prefer useful woman." Her world has become smaller. The garden, the cat, the morning papers, the occasional guest. Yet within that quiet, she carries entire continents. Kingston's heat, Panama's rains, Crimea's mud, all folded neatly into memory. In May of 1881, she feels a deep, lasting fatigue. "It's all right," she tells her nurse. "I finished my work." A few days later, surrounded by the familiar scent of tea and liniment, she closes her eyes for the last time. The official record is brief. Mary Seacole dies peacefully at her London home, age 75. But the truth feels larger than paper, more like the closing of a story written across oceans and decades. For a while, her name fades again. Graves get overgrown, and history, ever selective, lets dust settle over her. But not forever, because memory, like ivy, always finds its way back into the light. Years later, admirers rediscover her memoir. Scholars begin to ask, why did we forget her? Statues rise, schools bear her name. In time, the world will know again the woman who healed, hustled, and laughed her way through an empire. You picture her one last time, seated beneath that pergola of vines from her youth, sunlight dancing through leaves. Her voice steady and sure. No records, no debts, only light. And maybe somewhere beyond the horizon, Dionysus raises a cup in her honor, chuckling softly, to the nurse who never asked permission. The century shifts quietly, and you drift with it, through the soft gauze of memory, past the gaslit streets, and into a new London that hums with electricity and forgetfulness. Mary Seacole's story sleeps for decades beneath the city's noise. Her headstone gathers moss. Her book goes out of print, and the generation that knew her fades into sepia photographs. You find yourself wandering through archives that smell faintly of dust and ink. The pages you turn whisper, faint and crackling. Somewhere between the Times obituaries and old war registries, her name flickers. Small, steady, like a candle that refuses to die out completely. Historians still argue whether her disappearance from public memory was deliberate erasure or simple neglect. Was it because she was a woman? Because she was black? Or because the Victorian age, obsessed with tidy narratives, couldn't handle a healer who was also a businesswoman, a traveler, a woman who didn't apologize for taking up space? It would take almost a century for someone to lift that candle again. Your first stop is the mid-20th century. Post-war Britain, gray with ration lines and nostalgia. A young historian stumbles upon her memoir, The Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands, in a second-hand shop. Its pages, yellowed and delicate, crack open like an old secret. He reads the first line aloud. I am a Creole and have good Scotch blood coursing in my veins. He blinks. He's never seen a woman write her story like this, so unapologetically alive. That rediscovery sets off a quiet ripple. By the 1970s, scholars begin to reprint her book. Feminist historians debate her place beside Florence Nightingale, and Jamaican cultural movements reclaim her as one of their own. In Kingston, school children start hearing her name again. A quirky tidbit. In 1991, long after her passing, Mary Seacole was posthumously awarded the Jamaican Order of Merit, the country's third highest honor. Somewhere you can almost hear her laughing, saying, "Took you long enough." Her image starts appearing again, on murals in classrooms, even on currency. In Britain, activists and educators push for her inclusion in national curricula. A movement grows, not just about Mary, but about the kind of stories history chooses to keep or discard. You wander through Westminster in 2016, where a new statue gleams outside St. Thomas's Hospital, the first in the UK to honor a named Black woman. The bronze figure strides forward, one hand outstretched, eyes fixed on some unseen horizon. The folds of her cloak ripple like ocean waves, and at her feet an inscription reads, "She gave her life's work to the care of others." People stop to take photos. Some smile, others look puzzled, reading her name for the first time. You imagine Mary watching from somewhere unseen, amused. "Not bad," she'd say, though I might have added, "and served a mean pepper soup." The mainstream historical fact here: Seacole's rediscovery reshaped how Britain confronted its colonial past. Schools began teaching her alongside Nightingale, not as competition, but as complement. Two women who defined care differently, but profoundly. Her laughter, her herbs, her ledgers, her courage. They all found their way back into the public conscience. And for a while it feels as though the world has remembered properly at last. But memory is slippery. Some critics still question the scale of her contributions, debating whether she deserves her hero status. The arguments echo through op-eds and classrooms. Was she truly a battlefield nurse or more of a compassionate entrepreneur? Did myth inflate her deeds? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between, not in exaggeration, but in endurance. Because while the empire that ignored her has crumbled, her story endures, told softly at bedtime, across YouTube screens, in whispered narration designed not for glory, but for rest. You see her again, not as a statue, but in motion. Her sleeves rolled up, her face half lit by lamplight, spoon in one hand, ledger in the other. Balance through service, she once joked, and maybe a little rum. Her life, you realize, wasn't about sainthood or perfection. It was about agency. A woman refusing to be still, to be small, to be silent. And now, across the centuries, you sit here, the listener, the dreamer, letting her story settle over you like warm sunlight. The sounds fade. The rumble of carriages becomes the hum of traffic. The clink of her teacup becomes your own heartbeat. Mary's voice returns one last time, faint but familiar. Don't just remember me. Do something kind and call it even. The vineyard, the battlefield, the boarding house, the ledger, all dissolve into one quiet rhythm. Breath, rest, release. You close your eyes. The world exhales. And now the wind down begins. You're still here, the story dissolving around you like watercolor in warm water. The room feels softer now, edges blurred, air gentler. You can almost smell that faint trace of liniment and lavender that always seemed to follow Mary Seacole through the years. Outside, night folds over the city, not heavy, just calm, like silk drawn across the sky. You imagine her spirit walking somewhere between Kingston and London, between the tropics and the Thames, smiling at the stubborn rhythm of human kindness. Your breathing slows, matching the quiet pulse of history itself. That slow, patient heartbeat beneath everything. If you listen closely, you can still hear her humming, a lullaby older than the empire, older than books. It's the sound of a woman who lived fiercely, laughed loudly and rested rarely, finally at peace. And as you drift, you realize the story never really ended. It simply became part of the air. So let it carry you now, out over calm seas, towards soft horizons, where even the busiest hearts can finally rest. Good night, traveler. Sweet dreams.